Hey slot car fans, we're back, and this time we want to share with you some of the things we do on race night that you may want to consider for your slot car club. There is a caveat to having a slot car club, however, and that is you have to have friends. If you don't have any friends, you can try this.
Hello?
Hi, I'm looking for a Mr. Fitzwell.
Yes, this is Dick Fitzwell.
Hey, I was just calling to see if you wanted to join my slot car racing club.
Who is this?
It's Salami. However, the method of calling random people from the phone book doesn't normally work too well. And if you do have friends, they can't be totally lame and would rather sit home at night watching TV instead of coming over and playing with cool toys. And finally, if you have too many friends like the following.
Hey, Salami, what's up?
Hey PW, I'm starting a new slot car club, thought you might want to join.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go ask my wife. Hold on. Yeah, she says I can't. Sorry.
Then you can pretty much forget about having a slot car club. So, if you're still with us, let's move on. Just an FYI before we get started, most of the information presented here can be applied to any club, whether they're running Scalextric, Carrera, Ninco, SCX, and others, both analog and digital. However, some topics may be more specific to digital, and even more specifically, Carrera Digital 132. Firstly, all the guys in the club own their own car or cars. We don't supply the cars. Now, if you're a track owner and you have a whole stable of cars and you don't mind people coming over and driving them and smashing them up, that's perfectly fine. It's just something we don't do. Sometimes we'll invite a noob over, basically a prospect, somebody we think might want to join the club. In that case, we'll give them what we call a rental car, which is basically a beater. Not a total chunk of shit, but a solid car that's got decent performance, but not too fast so they don't get themselves in trouble. And if they like it and they want to come back and race some more, then they got to bring their own car. Before guys in the club start buying cars, decide what class you're going to run. And when I say class, I don't necessarily mean what the full-scale cars would run as far as classes, like NASCAR or GT3, but rather how they perform as a slot car. We're not sure about other manufacturers, but as far as Carrera cars go, some models have a distinctly different performance than other models. In our club, we run what we would classify as Tier 1 cars. And these are the fastest cars, and fastest not necessarily meaning top speed, but rather they'll yield the quickest lap times because of their overall performance. Most of these are those that are modeled after the GT3 cars or the DTM cars. Also, if you have a large track where you'll be hitting lane changers at high speed, avoid this turd. The Tier 2 cars aren't going to be as fast as the Tier 1. Based on our experience, Tier 2 cars will be like the Firebirds, the vintage stock cars, the street rods, and there's others. And then Tier 3 are a real handful, real slippery cars, but we're not really going to get into that because there's not many of them out there anyway. Other manufacturers may use the same chassis for all their cars, in which case the performance of those cars may be pretty much the same, regardless of the model. We're not really sure. So just be aware that, at least with Carrera, there can be a big performance difference between models. In summary, be sure to establish what class of cars you're going to run. That way, everybody's cars are going to be competitive with each other. Also, it's a good idea to let guys know what brand you're running, especially with digital, because if you don't, guaranteed somebody will show up with a car that doesn't work with your track. One type of car we don't allow in our club is what we call wedges. And these are basically the Can-Am style cars like the Chaparrals and the Porsche 917. We're running digital, therefore more than one car per lane, and cars will bump into each other, happens regularly. With the cars we run, when they make contact, they just tap bumpers, and most of the time, both cars stay on the track. But these cars are shaped like doorstops, and if they run into the back of some other car, it's just going to lift that car off the track, and we're going to end up with more crashes and more marshaling, and we're trying to minimize that. And this goes for F1 cars as well. Now, if we had an entire class of just these cars, that'd be fine. But you don't want to have everybody be running street cars and then have one guy out there driving a ramp around the track. Another rule for our club, all cars are run stock. No modified motors, no aftermarket magnets, no removing the interior to make the car lighter. Definitely no silicone tires. Urethane tires are okay if you can't find the OEM replacements because sometimes those are difficult to get for Carrera. Also, no hardening of the front tires. If you're not familiar with that, it's the practice of putting clear nail polish or super glue on the front tires to make them hard so that it reduces the drag. And we don't disallow that because of any performance advantage, but rather, when you turn your tires into hard plastic like that, they just get annoyingly noisy. We do allow tuning of the rear tires because, well, that's tuning, it's not modifying. As a matter of fact, we have a tuning station available for everybody to use. And you might ask, how come you don't allow modifications to the cars? Well, simply put, our slot car club isn't a bunch of pro racers. It's just a group of friends that gets together every 3 weeks or so during the winter to socialize, have some drinks, have some fun racing. We don't want it to turn into a competition to see who can spend more money or spend more time in their workshop working on their car than they do actually driving the damn thing. No pressure, just fun. As far as the layouts go for our club tracks, we keep it on the simpler side for a couple of reasons. As mentioned before, the guys in our slot club anyway aren't professional slot car drivers. Most of them don't have their own tracks at home. They don't go out and run at hobby shops either. Pretty much the only time they race is when they come over for club night. If the track is too technical, the guys won't be able to learn it very well, and we'll end up with a lot of wrecks or just bad racing. So with a simpler design, there's less wrecks, more racing, everybody's a little more competitive, the races are closer, and it's just a lot more fun that way. Another reason for keeping our track relatively simple is for marshaling. For those not familiar with the term, marshaling is essentially just the act of putting a car back on the track. We run with dedicated marshals, basically 2 or 3 members that aren't in that race that are just doing the marshaling. If the track has a lot of high-risk elements, essentially the tighter turns, the marshals are going to have to cover a lot of ground. They're going to be all over the place trying to marshal cars. So our tracks don't have to be a simple oval, but also they're not a plate of spaghetti either. For more information on layouts, you might want to check out our video on track design considerations. Link is in the description. As mentioned previously, we use dedicated marshals, which are guys whose only job is to marshal for that race. This allows us to not have to use track calls. What track calls are is when somebody wrecks, everybody stops racing till that car's put back on the track, and then they start racing again. That just slows things down. You don't want to have to be stopping the race every 2 laps. We also don't want to have drivers have to marshal at the same time. For example, everybody stands on a corner, that's their corner to watch, and if somebody else wrecks, they got to fix that car while they're trying to drive their own at the same time. That just leads to more crashes. So we have schedules, and that rotates the drivers and the marshals through. And we have several schedules depending on how many people are expected to show up on a given night. Here's an example schedule for heat races where we always have 5 drivers and 3 marshals. In the highlighted area, you can see heat number 1, there's the 5 drivers, there's the 3 marshals. Then for race number 2, we rotate through. Some guys will stay on to drive another race, others will go to marshal, some marshals will come up to drive, then race 3, same thing, and so on. And this is kind of track dependent too. You might have a smaller track and you only need 2 marshals, in which case you can have 6 drivers and 2 marshals instead. And maybe you have a smaller club and you only have 6 members, for example, so of course your schedule is going to differ. Or maybe you have 9 or 10, again, requires a different schedule. Regardless of the number of participants, however, it is important that they all run the same number of races, and where possible, we try to have them race against everybody else the same number of times too. If you're going to run a rotation like this, and all the drivers need to run the same number of races, then the number of heats scheduled is going to equal the number of drivers. Therefore, you have 6 drivers, you're going to schedule 6 heats, 7 drivers show up, 7 heats, and so on, regardless of how many run at one time or how many you have marshaling. It might take a few weekends before you get a good feel for how long it's going to take you to get through your schedule. Kind of depends on your clientele. Basically, how much time do they waste in between races getting ready or doing other things, going outside for a butt in the yard, sparking up a doobie or whatever. The damn pot smokers can slow you down a lot. So after that's determined, then you can adjust the length of your heat races or your main events to fill the time allotted. There's a couple ways you can determine the winner for the night. When all the racing's over, you can add up all the points everybody earned for all their heat races and see who won. We don't do that. We think it's kind of anticlimactic. So we use the qualifiers and mains format. When all the heat races are finished, we look at the scores. That determines which main event the drivers go into. In this example here, we're taking the top 4 finishers. They qualify for A main. The remainder run in B main, and you can think about it as like a last chance qualifier because the winner of B main bumps up and then runs in A main with the big boys. So the B main or LCQ is a longer race than the heat races. It'll be like 35 laps or 50 laps, something like that. And of course after that we'll run A main or the main event, and that's even a longer race, 75 laps, maybe 100 laps. That usually depends on how late it's getting. The cool thing about running this way is that the last race always means something. That's where the winner for the night is determined. You don't have someone that's been running away with it the whole time and they've already won for the night statistically, even before the last race is run. So running a main event essentially comes down to the best drivers of that night, all in one race, anything can happen, winner take all. Thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for part 2 for more ideas you may want to use in your slot car club.